The sound of dying wasn't a scream or a rattle. In the sterile purgatory of the Johns Hopkins Intensive Care Unit, it was a rhythmic, synthetic bleep that sliced through the silence every 2 seconds. To Elias Vance, sitting in the uncomfortable vinyl chair that had been his bed, his office, and his prison for the past 3 weeks, that sound was the only clock that mattered. It was a countdown, though he didn't know how much time was left on the timer, only that the numbers were falling faster than he could patch the code. The air in the room tasted of recirculated oxygen and aggressive antiseptic, a chemical cocktail that burned the back of his throat and did nothing to mask the underlying scent of decay that seemed to cling to his clothes. Elias rubbed his face, his palms scraping against the rough stubble on his cheeks. He hadn't shaved in days. He hadn't slept in more than 4 hours at a stretch since Maya was admitted. He looked at her. Maya, his little sister, though at 22 she was hardly a child anymore. Yet, beneath the tangle of tubes and wires, beneath the translucent pallor of her skin and the dark bruising around her 4 lines, she looked impossibly small. The autoimmune disorder eating her alive was a ghost in the machine, a biological glitch that the doctors here could identify but couldn't debug. They called it refractory, a polite medical term for hopeless. There was a specialist in Zurich, a clinic that dealt in experimental treatments and miracles for the 1%, but the cost of admission was a number so high it looked like an IP address. Elias had drained his savings. He had drained the small inheritance their parents had left. He had maxed out 3 credit cards and taken a predatory loan that he knew he could never repay. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close. He was a coder, a wizard of the digital architecture that underpinned the modern world, yet he was completely powerless to rewrite the script of his own life. The monitor beeped. Bleep, bleep. A jagged green line traced the weak electrical impulses of her heart. Elias opened his laptop, the screen's glow illuminating his hollow eyes. He wasn't working. He was staring at a terminal window, a black void with a blinking cursor. He had spent the last year building something in the shadows, a piece of software he called DeepTruth. It was an obsession born of boredom and arrogance, a neural network designed not just to swap faces, but to understand the biological mechanics of truth and deception. He had taught the AI to recognize the microtremors in a larynx, the dilation of pupils, the involuntary twitch of the zygomaticus major muscle. It could synthesize reality with a terrifying fidelity. In the hacker forums on the dark web, rumors of his code had circulated, a digital weapon of mass destruction in an era where seeing was believing. He had received offers to sell it, offers from pornographers, from scammers, from state-sponsored chaos agents. He had refused them all. Elias had a code of ethics, however frayed it had become. He was a gray hat, not a black one. He broke into systems to expose flaws, not to exploit them. But as he looked at Maya's chest barely rising, ethics felt like a luxury for people who weren't watching their family die. A vibration in his pocket broke his trance. He pulled out his phone. Another notification from the hospital billing department.
Urgent.
Final notice. He swiped it away with a thumb that trembled slightly. He needed coffee. If he didn't get caffeine into his system, he was going to pass out. And the irrational fear that Maya would slip away the moment he closed his eyes was a monster sitting on his chest. He stood up, his joints popping, and leaned over the bed. He brushed a strand of hair away from Maya's forehead. Her skin was fever-hot. "I'll be right back, May," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Just stay online." "Okay, just stay online." He walked out of the room, the sliding glass door hissing shut behind him, sealing the silence back inside. The corridor was a highway of misery, populated by nurses in scrubs that looked like pajamas and families with faces carved from stone. Elias kept his head down, navigating the labyrinth toward the elevators. He felt like an intruder here. This was a place of biology, of fluids and flesh, and he was a creature of logic and silicon. He didn't understand how to fix a failing organ. He only knew how to fix failing systems. The elevator ride down to the lobby was a slow descent into hell. A woman in the corner was crying softly into a tissue. A doctor was reading a clipboard, indifferent. Elias stared at the floor numbers changing, wishing he could hack the elevator to plummet, to just end the crushing pressure in his skull. The cafeteria was bright, too bright. The fluorescent lights hummed with an angry frequency that drilled into his temples. He bought a cup of black sludge that the hospital masqueraded as coffee and found a table in the far corner, away from the prying eyes of the other mourners in waiting. He opened his laptop again, not because he had work to do, but because the screen was a shield. It was a barrier between him and the reality of his poverty. He took a sip of the scalding coffee and typed a command to check his offshore crypto wallet. The balance stared back at him, 0.004 BTC. Not even enough to pay for the coffee he was drinking, if he converted it. He was drowning. Elias Vance. The voice was low, smooth, and carried a tone of authority that didn't belong in a hospital cafeteria. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of inventory. Elias didn't jump, but his fingers froze on the keyboard. He slowly looked up. Standing on the other side of the table was a man who looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine ad for high-end scotch. He was wearing a charcoal three-piece suit that cost more than Elias's car. His hair was silver, perfectly coiffed, and his eyes were the color of ice water, clear, cold, and utterly devoid of empathy. He didn't look like a doctor. He didn't look like a cop. He looked like a shark in human skin. "Who asks?" Elias said, his voice guarding the perimeter. He casually moved his hand to hover over the Control-W shortcut to close his windows, a reflex from years of looking over his shoulder. "A friend of a friend," the man said, pulling out the plastic chair opposite Elias and sitting down with a grace that suggested he owned the furniture. "Although, in your line of work, friend is a nebulous term. Let's say I'm an admirer of your architecture." Elias narrowed his eyes. "I'm not an architect. I'm unemployed. You have the wrong guy." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a mechanical lifting of the lips. "Don't play coy, Mr. Vance. It insults both our intelligences. I know you are Ghost_Protocol on the Evotech forums. I know you were the one who exposed the security flaw in the NASDAQ server 3 years ago but never took the bounty because you didn't want a KYC. And I know about DeepTruth." Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital air conditioning. He slammed his laptop shut. "I don't know what you're talking about. If you're feds, show me a badge. If you're not, get lost. The feds would have kicked down your door and confiscated your hardware," the man said calmly. "I'm here to offer you a lifeline." He reached into his inner jacket pocket. Elias tensed, ready to bolt, but the man only produced a sleek, black tablet. He slid it across the table. "Zurich is lovely this time of year, isn't it? The clinic, specifically. I hear Dr. Bauer is a miracle worker with autoimmune deficiencies." Elias felt the blood drain from his face. The noise of the cafeteria, the clinking of silverware, the murmur of voices, faded into a dull roar. "How do you know that?" he hissed, leaning forward. "If you've been watching her." "We watch everything, Elias. It's the nature of the information age. We know she has maybe 3 weeks. We know you've been rejected for the medical loan. We know you're desperate." The man tapped the tablet screen. It lit up, displaying a bank interface. The balance showed 0. "I represent a consortium of individuals who are concerned about the direction of this country. We have a problem, and we believe your specific skill set is the solution." "I'm not a hitman," Elias spat. "No, you're something far more dangerous. You're a storyteller." The man leaned in, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "We don't want you to kill anyone. We want you to create a truth. A new truth." Elias looked at the tablet, then back at the man. "You want the algorithm. We want you to use the algorithm. We have raw data, terabytes of it. Voice samples, video footage, mannerisms. But we need the artist to paint the picture. We need a video, Elias. A video that looks so real, feels so visceral, that no amount of forensic analysis can debunk it before the news cycle moves on." "A deepfake," Elias said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "You want me to frame someone. We want you to reveal the inner nature of a public figure." The man corrected, smoothly sidestepping the morality. "Think of it as exposing a hidden reality. And in exchange," he swiped on the tablet, The zero balance changed. It rolled over 10236, $2 million. The number sat there, glowing green. Full funding for the Zurich procedure. Medical transport via private jet included. Plus enough left over to ensure you never have to code for scraps again. Elias stared at the number. It was the price of his soul. It was the price of Maya's life. The two were now identical. He felt a wave of nausea. He knew instinctively that this wasn't just a job. This was a crossroads. If he took this money, he was crossing a line he could never uncross. He would be using his genius not to reveal truth, but to manufacture a lie so potent it could alter reality. Who? Elias asked, his voice barely audible. The man swiped the screen again. A photo appeared. It was a face Elias saw every day on the hospital TV, on the billboards outside, on the front page of the newspapers scattered on the cafeteria tables. Senator Arthur Hale, the golden boy, the reformist, the man polling 10 points ahead of the incumbent. He was campaigning on a platform of transparency and anti-corruption. He was the only politician Elias had ever listened to without wanting to throw a brick at the screen. Hale? Elias looked up, incredulous. He's clean. Everyone knows he's clean. I've dug into him myself. He's boringly clean. Everyone has a price, Elias. Even you, the man said, his eyes locking onto Elias's. Senator Hale is an obstacle to progress. My employers need him removed from the board. Not physically, that creates martyrs. We need him destroyed socially. We need him to say things that will make his own base vomit. We need him to be caught on tape, selling out the very people he claims to protect. You want me to make Arthur Hale commit political suicide. I want you to use DeepTruth to make it happen. You have 48 hours to give us a proof of concept. 2 weeks to the final product. The election is in 3 weeks. We dropped the bomb 3 days before the polls open. Elias looked at the photo of Hale. He looked at the $2 million. Then his mind flashed back to the room upstairs. The sound of the monitor. Bleep, bleep, the heat of Maya's skin. The way she had looked at him yesterday. Eyes filled with a terrified apology for being a burden. I'm sorry, Eli, she had mouthed. I'm so sorry. She was going to die. Unless he did this. What do you want him to say? Elias asked, his voice dead. The man smiled, a predator sensing the kill. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a flash drive. He slid it across the table until it rested against Elias's hand. The script is in there, along with the access keys to a secure server farm in Virginia. You'll need the processing power. Your laptop won't cut it for the fidelity we require. Elias's hand closed over the drive. It was cold metal, heavy for its size. And if I take this, you guarantee the transfer? Zurich gets paid directly? The moment you deliver the final render, the money clears. Maya is on a plane within the hour. The man stood up, buttoning his jacket. Do not try to trace the money. Do not try to find out who I am. And do not fail, Mr. Vance. We are not the kind of investors who accept a loss. Wait, Elias said, standing up. What's your name? I need to know who I'm selling my soul to. The man paused. He looked Elias up and down, assessing the damage he had just inflicted. You can call me Sterling, but it doesn't matter. You're not working for a person, Elias. You're working for the inevitable. Sterling turned and walked away, his shoes clicking rhythmically on the linoleum floor, blending into the hospital's ambient noise. Elias stood there for a long time, the flash drive burning a hole in his palm. He looked around the cafeteria. A janitor was mopping up a spill. A nurse was laughing at a text message. The world kept turning, indifferent to the pact he had just made. He sat back down and opened his laptop. He plugged in the drive. The directory contained terabytes of data. Audio_logs. High_res_scans. Mannerisms_database. And a single text file named script. TXT. Elias opened the text file. He read the first few lines, and a chill went down his spine. It was vile. It was designed to trigger every rage receptor in the human brain. It was a masterclass in character assassination. He closed the laptop, shoved it into his battered messenger bag, and stood up. He walked out of the cafeteria, bypassing the elevators that led back to the ICU. He couldn't look at Maya right now. If he looked at her, he might vomit. He needed to work. He needed to bury himself in the code so deep that he couldn't hear his own conscience screaming. He walked out of the hospital main entrance and into the night. It had started to rain, a cold, miserable drizzle that slicked the streets of Baltimore. He pulled his hood up and walked toward the parking garage where his rusted sedan was waiting. The city lights reflected in the puddles like fractured neon ghosts. Elias Vance, the protector, the brother, the gray hat hacker, was dead. In his place was something else. A ghost in the machine. A liar for hire. He got into his car, threw the bag on the passenger seat, and gripped the steering wheel. He stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes looked different, darker. He started the engine, the belt squealing in protest. 2 weeks, he whispered to the empty car. I'm sorry, Hale, but it's you or her. He threw the car into gear and drove out into the rain, heading not towards home, but towards the highway, towards the secure server farm in Virginia, and towards the darkest lines of code he would ever write. The safe house wasn't a house at all. It was a concrete blister on the landscape of rural Virginia, buried beneath a nondescript logistics warehouse that officially stored HVAC parts. To the outside world, it was a distribution node for industrial cooling units. To Elias Vance, it was the belly of the beast. He had driven 3 hours south from Baltimore, following GPS coordinates that vanished from his phone the moment he arrived at the security gate. Now, he was 3 stories underground, in a server room that hummed with the collective tinnitus of 5,000 cooling fans. The air was frigid, kept at a constant 60 degrees to protect the silicon, but Elias was sweating. He sat in the center of the room, an island of chaos in a sea of orderly server racks. The workspace Sterling had provided was obscene in its power. 3 80-inch 8K monitors formed a panoramic wall in front of him. Beneath the desk, a custom-built cluster of GPU workstations purred, possessing more raw processing power than the entire computer science department of his old university. It was a setup designed for rendering Pixar movies or simulating nuclear decay. Elias was using it to murder a man's reputation. For the first 48 hours, Elias didn't sleep. He barely moved. He existed in a fugue state of caffeine and code, fueled by the energy drink Sterling's faceless handlers left at the airlock door every 6 hours. He was building the skeleton. The DeepTruth algorithm he had written on his battered laptop was a prototype, a brilliant but rough sketch. Here, with this hardware, he could turn that sketch into a masterwork oil painting. He began by ingesting the data. The flash drive Sterling had given him was just the key. The actual data resided on a secure partition of the server farm. It was a terrifyingly comprehensive library of Senator Arthur Hale. Elias watched the progress bars fill as the system digested 20 years of Arthur Hale's life. Every televised speech, every debate, every podcast appearance, every blurry cell phone video taken by a constituent. The AI needed to learn Hale not just as a face, but as a physics simulation. It needed to know how the light caught the ridge of his nose when he turned his head to the left. It needed to understand the specific elasticity of the skin under his eyes when he was tired. It needed to map the micro-movements of his tongue when he pronounced his S sounds, a slight sibilance that was Hale's vocal signature. Map zygomaticus major, Elias muttered to the empty room, his fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard that clattered like gunfire. Correlate with audio frequency range 400 to 800 Hz. Adjust for stress indicators. On the center screen, a wireframe mesh of Arthur Hale's face floated in a black void. It was a ghost, a geometric abstraction of a human being composed of millions of tiny polygons. As Elias tweaked the parameters, the mesh moved. It smiled. It frowned. It mimicked the opening of a mouth. It was the digital clay, and Elias was the sculptor. But the clay fought back. The early renders were horrifying, grotesque parodies of humanity that fell straight into the uncanny valley. The eyes were dead. The skin looked like wax. The movement was too fluid, lacking the jerky, biological imperfection of real life. Elias scrubbed his face, feeling the grit in his eyes. He opened a new window, pulling up a split screen. On the left, raw footage of Hale debating on CNN. On the right, the digital puppet. "You're too perfect," Elias whispered to the avatar. "Humans aren't perfect, Arthur. We twitch. We stutter. We bleed." He spent the next 3 days injecting flaws into the system. He wrote subroutines to simulate capillary blood flow changes under the skin, creating imperceptible flushes of color when the digital avatar got angry. He programmed the eyes to perform saccadic movements, those tiny, jerky jumps that human eyes make when scanning a room, so the gaze wouldn't look like a shark stare. He added the texture of pores, the slight asymmetry of Hale's left ear, the way a specific vein in his temple pulsed when he raised his voice. It was an act of intimate violence. To destroy Arthur Hale, Elias had to know him better than his own wife did. He spent hours listening to Hale's breathing patterns, isolating the sound of his inhalation between sentences. He watched the man age in reverse and fast forward, studying how gravity affected his jowls over the last decade. He became obsessed with the man's hands, the way Hale used them to punctuate his points, a chopping motion with the right hand, an open palm with the left. By day 5, the avatar was terrifying. When Elias typed "Hello World" into the text-to-speech engine, the face on the screen looked at him, blinked with frightening realism, and spoke with Arthur Hale's voice. "Hello World." It wasn't enough. It looked like Hale, sounded like Hale, but it didn't feel like him. It lacked the soul, the specific emotional cadence that made a person unique. Sterling had demanded a video of Hale accepting a bribe, selling out his principles. To make that believable, Elias needed to know what Hale sounded like when he was hiding something. He needed the sound of deceit, and the public archives only contained the sound of a polished politician. Elias leaned back in his ergonomic chair, the leather creaking in the silence. He needed private data. The drive Sterling gave him had audio logs, but they were mostly wiretapped phone calls of mundane campaign strategy. "We need to poll better in Ohio," or "Tell the donors the gala is at 7. It was dry. It wasn't raw. "I need you naked," Elias said to the screen. Metaphorically, he cracked his knuckles. This was the part he was good at, the creative part. If the provided data wasn't enough, he would go get his own. Sterling had said do not fail. That gave him carte blanche to improvise. Elias minimized the rendering software and opened a terminal. He didn't attack the campaign's official servers. Those would be fortresses, monitored by the NSA and private contractors. Instead, he went for the soft underbelly. He targeted Hale's personal life. He found a vulnerability in the home automation system of Hale's private residence in Georgetown, an outdated firmware on a smart thermostat. It was a rookie mistake, a digital backdoor left ajar. Through the thermostat, he jumped to the router. From the router, he sniffed the traffic for the personal tablet Hale used for reading at night. It took him 4 hours of brute force decryption, the GPU cluster beneath his desk tearing through the encryption keys like tissue paper. Access granted. Elias was in. He began downloading Hale's personal cloud backup. Voice memos, dictations for his memoir, private video diaries, and draft emails. He told himself it was just for the data. He needed to hear Hale whispering, crying, shouting in private. He needed the acoustic fingerprint of the man's vulnerability. He opened a folder labeled Drafts, Legislation, Personal. He expected to find the dirt. He expected to find the evidence that would make his job easier. Proof that Hale was just another scumbag in a suit, making Elias's task a moral imperative rather than a sin. He wanted to find emails to mistresses, secret accounts in the Caymans, derogatory jokes about the voters. He wanted to hate Arthur Hale. Hate would make the coding faster. He clicked on a voice memo dated 2 weeks prior. The file name was Late Night Thoughts Medical Bill. Elias put on his noise-canceling headphones and pressed play. The sound of Arthur Hale's voice filled his head, intimate and close, recorded clearly on a high-end tablet microphone. The audio quality was perfect. "It's 3 a.m., Hale's voice said. He sounded exhausted. The polished baritone cracked with fatigue. "I can't sleep. I keep thinking about the letters. Mrs. Higgins from Detroit. She's rationing insulin. breaking the vials in half. This goddamn medieval. There was a pause. The sound of a glass being set down on a coaster. The lobbyists came by today. Hale continued, his voice hardening. PharmaCorp, they offered to double the PAC contribution if I dropped the price cap clause in the Relief Act. They smiled at me. They sat on my couch and smiled and threatened to bury me in attack ads. A bitter laugh. I should take the money. That's what the party wants. That's what the consultants say. Play the game, Arthur. Survive to fight another day. Elias sat up straighter. The waveform on the screen spiked as Hale raised his voice. But I can't. If I sign that deal, I'm signing death warrants. I look at my granddaughter and I think, what if it were her? What if she was the one dying because some hedge fund wanted a better quarterly report? No, I'm going to burn them. I'm going to release the bill next month, and I'm going to name names. It might kill my career, but I'll be damned if I let Mrs. Higgins die for a stock price. The recording ended. Elias sat in the freezing server room, the silence pressing against his eardrums. He replayed it. Then he played the next file. A video diary. Hale sitting in his kitchen wearing an old t-shirt, reading a draft of the bill. The Universal Medical Relief Act. Hale read aloud to the empty room. Section 4. Immediate subsidization of life-saving surgeries for congenital and autoimmune conditions. Elias froze. He rewound the video. Autoimmune conditions. He pulled up the text of the draft bill from the hacked files. He searched for the keywords. There it was. A clause specifically targeting the type of experimental treatment Maya needed. If this bill passed, the surgery in Zurich wouldn't cost $2 million. It would be covered. It would be a right, not a luxury. Elias stared at the screen, his breath hitching in his chest. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Arthur Hale wasn't the enemy. Arthur Hale was the only person in Washington actually fighting for Maya. And Elias was sitting in a dark hole, building the weapon that would destroy him. Oh God! Elias whispered, burying his face in his hands. What am I doing? The irony was sickening. To save his sister, he had sold his soul to the very people who were ensuring she couldn't be saved by the law. Sterling, the investors, they weren't political rivals. They were the lobbyists. They were the PharmaCorp goons Hale had mentioned. They knew Hale was going to drop the hammer on their profits, so they hired a desperate kid to assassinate his character before he could sign the bill. The door to the server room beeped. The heavy magnetic lock disengaged with a solid thunk. Elias jolted, slamming the laptop shut and minimizing the hacked windows on the main screens. He brought up the Deepfake interface just as the door swung open. It wasn't Sterling. It was one of the silent delivery men. A hulk of a man with a neck thick as a tree stump. He carried a tray of food and a fresh tablet. He set them down on the desk without a word. Mr. Sterling wants an update. The man grunted. I'm processing. Elias stammered, his heart hammering against his ribs. The facial mapping is 90% complete. I'm working on the audio synthesis. The man tapped the tablet he had brought. The screen lit up. It wasn't a bank account this time. It was a live video feed. Elias leaned in, his blood turning to ice. The feed was grainy, black and white. It showed a hospital room. Maya's room. She was asleep, the monitors blinking beside her. But the angle was different. This wasn't a security camera. This was a camera placed inside the room on the bookshelf facing the bed. She looks peaceful, the man said, his voice void of emotion. Dr. Bauer in Zurich is ready to receive her. The jet is fueled at Dulles. But Mr. Sterling is concerned about your pace. He feels you might be distracted. I'm not distracted, Elias said, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and rage. It takes time. If you want it to be perfect, it takes time. You have 48 hours left, the man said. Finish the render, or the next live feed you see won't be so peaceful. The man turned and left, the door locking behind him. Elias stared at the tablet. He watched Maya's chest rise and fall. They were in the room with her. If he stopped, she died. If he ran, she died. If he tried to expose them now without leverage, she died. He looked back at the main monitors. The wireframe face of Arthur Hale stared back at him, waiting for instructions. Elias felt a tear slide down his cheek, hot and angry. He wiped it away aggressively. He had no choice. He had to finish it. But as he looked at the digital puppet, a cold, hard resolve began to crystallize in his stomach. He would finish it, yes. He would make the most convincing lie in human history. He would make Arthur Hale say exactly what Sterling wanted him to say. But he was the architect, and an architect always knows where the structural weaknesses are. "Okay," Elias said to the empty room, his voice steady now. "You want a monster? I'll build you a monster." He turned back to the keyboard. He didn't just type, he attacked the keys. He pulled the audio samples from Hale's angry private rant about the lobbyists. "I'm going to burn them." He isolated the grit in the voice, the vibration of the vocal cords. He took that raw, righteous anger and inverted it. He mapped it onto the script Sterling had provided. He opened the script file. The scene was set in a dimly lit hotel room. Hale was supposed to be meeting a warlord, accepting a suitcase of cash. "Hale, they are just sheep. I take the money, they get the lies. I need the funding, and you need the laws to look the other way." Elias began the synthesis. He merged the face, the skin textures, the lighting. He meticulously crafted the reflections in Hale's eyes. He added a slight sheen of sweat to Hale's forehead, the kind that suggests greed and nervous excitement. He manipulated the mouth to form the words, syncing the tongue movements to the phonemes with surgical precision. But he did something else, too. Something invisible to the naked eye. He opened the code for the background rendering. The scene required a generic hotel room background. Elias built it, but in the digital shadows behind the virtual Arthur Hale, he embedded a pattern. It was a chaotic arrangement of pixels, looking like nothing more than film grain or low-light noise. But to a spectral analyzer, to another AI, it was a QR code, a beacon. He worked through the night and the next day and the next night. The exhaustion became a hallucination. The walls of the server room seemed to breathe. The humming of the fans sounded like Maya's name. "Maya, Maya." Finally, the timeline on his editing software turned green. Render complete. Elias put down his headphones. His ears were ringing. On the center screen, the video played. It was perfect. It was terrifying. There was Arthur Hale, clear as day, looking at a suitcase of money and sneering with a contempt that chilled the blood. It was indistinguishable from reality. If Elias hadn't made it, he would have believed it. He had captured the soul of the man he had found in the private recordings and twisted it into a demon. He watched the digital Hale laugh. A laugh Elias had constructed from 3 different jokes Hale had told at fundraising dinners, pitched down 2 semitones to sound sinister. "It's done," Elias whispered. He pulled up the secure upload terminal Sterling had provided. The destination server was encrypted, a direct line to a media distribution botnet that would seed the video to thousands of social media accounts simultaneously. Once he hit send, there was no taking it back. It would be everywhere. Hale would be destroyed. The Medical Relief Act would die with him. Elias's finger hovered over the enter key. He looked at the tablet where Maya was still sleeping. He looked at the digital Hale. He thought about the ghost he had hidden in the background noise. It wasn't enough to save Hale, not yet. It was a breadcrumb, a contingency. But for now, he had to pull the trigger. He had to be the villain so his sister could live to see a world where villains existed. "Forgive me, Arthur," Elias said. He pressed enter. The upload bar raced across the screen. Upload complete. The room seemed to get colder. The deed was done. The weapon was fired. Elias sat back, his body trembling with the adrenaline crash. He waited for the phone to ring, for the money to clear, for the permission to leave this frozen tomb. But as he stared at the upload complete message, a notification popped up on his private, encrypted channel, the one he used for his gray hat work, the one Sterling shouldn't know about. It was a message from an unknown user. No subject, just an attachment. Elias clicked it. It was a photo. It was a picture taken from inside the server room, from the camera in the ceiling corner behind him. It showed the back of his head, the 3 monitors, and the code he had hidden in the background of the video. The text below the photo read, "We saw the artifact in the noise, Mr. Vance. Clever, but not clever enough. The money is sent. The girl is safe. But you're a liability." The heavy magnetic lock on the door clicked, but it didn't open. Instead, a red light began to flash above the frame. The hum of the cooling fans changed pitch. They were spinning down. The air circulation system shuddered and stopped. The silence that rushed in was heavy and suffocating. Then, a new sound, a hissing. The fire suppression system. Halon gas. Elias scrambled out of his chair, his lungs seizing in panic. They weren't coming to arrest him. They were scrubbing the server room. They were erasing the artist to protect the art. He grabbed his laptop and the flash drive. He looked at the heavy steel door. Sealed. He looked at the ventilation ducts, too small. He was trapped in a hermetically sealed box 3 stories underground, and the oxygen was about to be replaced by a gas that would put him to sleep forever. Elias looked at the main server racks, the blinking lights of the hard drives, the connection to the outside world. "Think," he screamed at himself, coughing as the first acrid taste of the gas hit his tongue. "You're a coder. Hack the damn door." He dove back to the keyboard, his fingers slipping on the keys as his vision began to blur. He didn't have to hack the door. He had to hack the building. He had to turn the safe house into a lighthouse. The hiss of the halon gas was the loudest sound in the universe. It wasn't a roar, but a sinister, pressurized whisper that filled the subterranean server room, a colorless tide rising to drown the world. Elias Vance coughed, a dry, racking spasm that felt like his lungs were trying to turn inside out. The air wasn't toxic. Halon didn't poison you. It simply evicted the oxygen, politely asking it to leave so the fire couldn't breathe. The problem was Elias couldn't breathe either. He was typing by muscle memory now, his vision swimming in a pool of gray static. The corners of the room were dissolving into darkness. Hypoxia, his brain registered sluggishly. Time to unconsciousness. Maybe 40 seconds. Time to brain death. For minutes. He couldn't hack the door lock. Sterling's team had physically severed the connection to the electronic keypad. He had seen the command execute in the system log just before the gas hit. It was a hardware air gap, unbridgeable by code. But the room itself, the room was still a machine. And Elias knew how to break machines. He didn't try to stop the gas. He did the opposite. He routed every ounce of power the facility had into the GPU cluster beneath the desk, the same silicon beast that had just birthed the monster of Arthur Hale. He bypassed the thermal throttles. He disabled the safety governors that kept the cards from melting. He commanded the cooling fans to stop. "Burn," he wheezed, his fingers slipping on the keys. "Burn, you bastards." The computer reacted instantly. The fans spun down with a dying whine. The temperature sensors on the dashboard spiked vertically. 80 degrees Celsius. 90. 100. The smell of ozone and frying plastic cut through the chemical sterility of the halon. The heat radiating from under the desk was a physical wave, blasting against his shins. Elias needed the building's master safety protocol to trigger. A fire suppression system was one thing, but a catastrophic thermal runaway in a subterranean facility was another. If the core temperature exceeded a critical threshold, federal safety code, hardwired into the building's logic board, mandated an emergency vent. The facility would have to unseal itself to prevent a pressure explosion. 110 degrees. The plastic casing of the GPUs was beginning to warp. "Come on," Elias thought, his head hitting the desk. The darkness was closing in. He felt sleepy, so incredibly sleepy. Suddenly, a siren shattered the silence. It was a different pitch than the gas warning. A low, guttural klaxon that vibrated in his teeth. Critical failure detected. Emergency ventilation sequence initiated. The heavy magnetic seal on the steel door disengaged with a concussive thud that shook the floor. The air pressure in the room reversed violently. The door didn't just open. It was sucked inward a few inches as the massive industrial fans in the warehouse above roared to life, desperate to flush the heat. Elias fell out of his chair, scrambling on hands and knees toward the crack of light. He clawed at the steel, his fingers finding purchase on the cold metal, and heaved. The door swung open. He tumbled into the corridor, gasping like a fish thrown onto a dock. The air here was stale and smelled of dust, but it had oxygen. Sweet, precious oxygen. He sucked it in greedily, his body convulsing as his blood re-oxygenated. He lay there for a moment, cheek pressed against the concrete floor, listening to the roar of the fans and the distant wail of the alarm. He was alive, but he wasn't safe. Sterling's man, the delivery guy, the Hulk, would be upstairs, and he would know Elias wasn't dead. Elias forced himself up. His legs felt like rubber. He grabbed his bag, checking to make sure the laptop and the flash drive were secure. He staggered toward the service elevator, but stopped. No, elevators were coffins. He shoved open the door to the emergency stairwell. As he climbed, the phone in his pocket began to vibrate. Not a call, a notification, then another, then a continuous, unbroken buzz that made his thigh numb. Elias paused on the landing between the second and first floor, leaning against the cinderblock wall. He pulled out his phone. The screen was a cascade of push notifications from every news app, social media platform, and aggregator in the Western Hemisphere. CNN. Breaking news. Senator Hale caught on tape. Fox. Exclusive leak. Hale accepts bribe, mocks voters. Twitter. Hashtag Hale exposed trending #1 worldwide. It had happened. The bomb had dropped. 300 miles away, in a green room behind the stage of a rally in Columbus, Ohio. The air had been sucked out of the room just as effectively as it had in Elias's cell. Senator Arthur Hale stood frozen, staring at an iPad held by his campaign manager, Sarah. The room was chaotic. Phones ringing off the hook, staffers running back and forth with pale faces, the muffled roar of the crowd outside waiting for a speech that would never happen. On the screen, Arthur saw himself. He was sitting in a dimly lit room he had never visited, wearing a suit he owned but hadn't worn in years. He watched himself lean forward, eyes glittering with a cynicism he didn't possess. "They are just sheep," the digital Arthur said, the voice so perfect, so intimately familiar, that the real Arthur felt a wave of vertigo. "I take the money, they get the lies." Arthur Hale looked up at Sarah. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny it, to scream that it was a fabrication, but the words died in his throat. How could he deny his own face? How could he argue with the evidence of his own voice? Arthur, his wife, Eleanor, whispered, clutching his arm. Her eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying mixture of confusion and fear. "Arthur, tell me that isn't real. Tell me you didn't." I didn't," Arthur stammered, but he sounded weak even to his own ears. The video was visceral. It bypassed logic and went straight to the gut. He watched the digital version of himself laugh. A cold, calculating sound that stripped away 20 years of public service in 3 seconds. "The networks are cutting away," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "They're canceling the broadcast. The DNC chair just texted me. They want a statement immediately, but, Arthur, the donors are pulling out. The phones won't stop ringing." Arthur looked at the screen again. He saw the suitcase of money. He saw the sneer. It was a masterpiece of assassination. It wasn't just a political hit. It was a soul murder. He realized, with a sinking horror, that no amount of press conferences or forensic analysis would matter in the next 24 hours. The image was out. The seed was planted. Even if he proved it was fake next week, tonight he was a monster. "Cancel the speech," Arthur said, sinking onto a folding chair. He felt old, older than his 60 years. "Get the car. We need to go." "Go where?" Sarah asked helplessly. "Away," Arthur whispered. "Just away." Back in the Virginia warehouse, the digital explosion was just noise in the ether. The physical danger was standing at the top of the stairs. Elias reached the heavy fire door leading to the warehouse floor. He eased it open a crack. The warehouse was vast, filled with towering shelves of boxed HVAC units. The lights were flickering due to the power surge he had caused downstairs. The alarm was still blaring, masking the sound of his breathing. He scanned the floor. He saw the delivery truck parked near the loading bay. And he saw the Hulk. The man was standing by the open bay door, a suppressed pistol in his hand, scanning the shadows. He wasn't looking at the stairwell. He was looking at the ventilation shafts, expecting Elias to crawl out like a rat. Elias needed a distraction. He pulled his laptop from his bag, crouching in the shadow of the doorframe. He booted it up. The battery was at 12%, but that was enough. He searched for the warehouse's local networks, the inventory system, the lighting grid, the automated forklifts. Come on, give me something sloppy, he prayed. He found the lighting controller. It was an unsecured Zigbee network, standard for industrial warehouses. He didn't have time to write a script. He just slammed a command into the terminal to strobe the entire grid at random intervals. Enter. The warehouse erupted into a chaotic disco of high-intensity LED flashes. Light, dark, light, dark. The rhythm was disorienting, nauseating. The gunman spun around, raising his weapon, confused by the sudden visual assault. Elias kicked the door open and sprinted. He didn't run toward the exit. He ran toward the forklift parked 10 yards away. He wasn't a fighter, but he knew physics. He vaulted into the cage of the forklift, jammed the key that had been left in the ignition. Laziness was the hacker's best friend, and slammed the throttle forward. The electric motor whined. The gunman turned, firing blindly into the strobing lights. Fut-fut. A bullet sparked off the roll cage inches from Elias's head. Elias ducked, steering the forklift not at the gunman, but at the shelving unit behind him. The forks smashed into the steel uprights of the rack. The collision threw Elias forward against the steering wheel, knocking the wind out of him, but the structural integrity of the shelf failed. Tons of boxed air conditioning units, wooden pallets, and steel beams cascaded down like a waterfall. It was an avalanche of industrial waste. The gunman looked up just in time to scream before he was buried under a collapsing mountain of inventory. Elias didn't wait to see if the man was dead. He scrambled out of the forklift, ignoring the pain in his ribs, and bolted for the loading bay door. The rain outside was torrential, a sheet of black water hammering the asphalt. He found his rusted sedan where he had left it, hidden behind a dumpster. He fumbled with his keys, dropping them in the mud, cursing, snatching them up with shaking hands. He threw himself into the driver's seat and cranked the engine. Sputtered, then caught. As he peeled out of the lot, tires spinning on the wet pavement, he saw headlights in the rearview mirror. An SUV, black, tinted windows, Sterling, or the backup crew. Elias floored it, the old engine screaming in protest. He drifted onto the rural highway, the rain blinding him. He wasn't driving toward Baltimore. He wasn't driving toward home. He had no home anymore. He glanced at his phone, mounted on the dashboard. The notifications were still pouring in, a river of hate directed at Arthur Hale. User 773, hang the traitor, Patriot_Jane. I knew he was scum. Look at that smirk. News now. Hale campaign enters nosedive as video surfaces. Elias gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles hurt. He was driving through the night, a fugitive in a world he had just set on fire. He checked the secure app he had used to communicate with the investors. Status: account deleted. He checked the Zurich bank account. The $2 million was there. It was real. They had kept their word in their own twisted way. Maya was safe. She would get the surgery. She would live. But at what cost? Elias turned on the car radio. Every station was talking about it. The pundits were screaming. The clip was being played again and again. He heard his own work, his own creation, echoing back at him from the speakers. I take the money, they get the lies. I'm sorry, Elias whispered to the rain-streaked windshield. I had to, but the guilt was a cold weight in his stomach, heavier than the halon gas. He had saved one life by destroying the hope of millions. He remembered Hale's voice from the private recording, the one about the insulin and the dying grandmother. I'm going to burn them. Hale was the good guy, and Elias had just handed the country over to the wolves. A pair of headlights appeared behind him. High beams, closing fast. Elias checked his speedometer. 80 miles per hour. The car behind him was doing 100. He wasn't safe yet. The chase wasn't over. It was just beginning. He reached over and grabbed the laptop from the passenger seat. He needed a weapon. He didn't have a gun, but he had the source code. He had the truth. But releasing it now wouldn't save him. They would kill him before the upload hit 10%. He needed leverage. He needed to disappear. He saw a sign for a turnoff. Interstate 95, Washington, D.C. 40 miles. He swerved the car, tires screeching, drifting across the wet lanes to catch the exit ramp at the last second. The SUV behind him overshot, brake lights flaring red in the mist, but it was too late. Elias had gained a few seconds. He needed a place with public Wi-Fi, a place with crowds, a place where he could vanish. He was going to D.C. He was going into the belly of the beast. As he merged onto the interstate, hiding his car amongst the stream of late-night trucks, Elias looked at the flash drive sitting in the cup holder. The little piece of plastic that contained the raw data, the proof of Hale's innocence, and the evidence of the conspiracy. "You want a war?" Elias muttered, his eyes dark and hard in the rearview mirror. "I'll give you a war." The digital ghost was loose, and he was about to haunt them all. The rain in Washington, D.C. didn't wash things clean, it just made the grime slicker. Elias Vance abandoned his rusted sedan in a long-term parking lot at Union Station, tucking the ticket under the visor of a Ford F-153 rows over. He wiped the steering wheel and the door handles with the sleeve of his hoodie, a futile gesture of forensic hygiene that he performed out of habit rather than hope. If Sterling's people found the car, they would find him. It was just a matter of time. He moved through the city like a wraith, sticking to the shadows of the brutalist architecture, avoiding the gaze of the ubiquitous security cameras that studded the Capitol like barnacles. He was walking into the lion's den, but it was the only place where the noise was loud enough to hide him. The suburbs were too quiet. In the suburbs, a stranger stood out. Here, among the lobbyists, the tourists, and the homeless, Elias was just another silhouette in a hoodie. He checked into a motel on New York Avenue, a crumbling relic of the mid-century motor lodge era that now catered to transients and people who paid in cash. The clerk, a man with skin like parchment and eyes that had seen too much, didn't ask for ID when Elias slid $300 across the bulletproof glass. He just handed over a physical key attached to a jagged piece of yellow plastic. Room 204. The room smelled of stale tobacco and industrial lemon cleaner, the scent of 1,000 secrets scrubbed away but never truly erased. Elias threw the deadbolt, dragged the heavy dresser in front of the door, and then collapsed onto the bed. His ribs throbbed where he had slammed into the steering wheel of the forklift. His lungs still burned with the phantom memory of halon gas. He lay there for a long time, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, listening to the sirens wailing in the distance. Every siren sounded like it was coming for him. He pulled the tablet he had stolen from the warehouse out of his waistband. It was a risk, it had a GPS chip, but he had wrapped it in a Faraday bag he kept in his messenger bag, a pouch lined with copper mesh that blocked all signals. He took it out now, swiftly disabled the location services at the root level using a bootleg diagnostic tool on a USB stick, and then connected to the motel's spotty Wi-Fi through a 7-layer VPN tunnel. He needed to see her. He accessed the private server of the medical transport company Sterling had used. He bypassed their firewall in 30 seconds. Their security was laughable compared to what he had just escaped. He found the flight manifest. Flight MD 404. Departed Dulles International. Destination, Zurich. She was airborne. Elias let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for a month. Maya was over the Atlantic. She was outside the jurisdiction of American politics, outside the immediate reach of the men with guns. Once she landed in Switzerland, Dr. Bauer would take over. The money had cleared. The contract was paid. Sterling, for all his villainy, was a businessman. He had honored the transaction. Elias closed his eyes, imagining Maya looking out the window at the clouds, unaware that her brother had just burned down the world to buy her ticket. "I did it," he whispered to the empty room. "You're safe." But the relief he expected didn't come. Instead, a hollow, freezing dread settled in his gut. He had saved one life. He had traded it for what? He sat up and turned on the television bolted to the wall. It was an old tube TV, the picture grainy, but the headline was clear enough. It was on every channel. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, even the local stations. Hailstorm. Senator caught in bribery scandal. The footage was playing on a loop. His footage, the masterpiece of lies he had crafted in the Virginia bunker. There was Arthur Hale, sneering at the camera, touching the briefcase, his voice dripping with elitist venom. "They are just sheep." Elias watched his own work with a detached, sickening fascination. It was flawless. The lighting match was perfect. The lip sync was uncanny. He had even added a subtle, subconscious audio layer of low-frequency hum that induced anxiety in the listener, a psychoacoustic trick he had learned from a leaked CIA manual. He hadn't just faked a video, he had weaponized human perception. The news anchor, a woman with a grave face, was reading a statement from Hale's campaign. "Senator Hale has suspended all campaign activities pending an internal investigation. Sources say the senator is in shock and has denied the authenticity of the video, but forensic experts have preliminarily stated that the footage shows no obvious signs of tampering." "No obvious signs," Elias muttered, cracking a warm soda he had bought from the vending machine. "Because I wrote the code that hides the signs." The screen cut to a reaction shot outside the Capitol. A group of protesters were burning Hale campaign signs. They were chanting, their faces twisted in hate. "Lock him up, liar, traitor." Then the camera cut to a split screen. On the other side was Julian Thorne. Thorne looked solemn, wearing a dark suit and a tie that signaled stability. He was standing at a podium, looking straight into the camera. "This is a dark day for our democracy," Thorne said, his voice smooth as silk. "I take no pleasure in seeing my opponent fall to such depths. But this confirms what we have always feared, that Washington is broken. That there are men who will smile to your face and sell your future for a suitcase of cash." Elias threw the soda can against the wall. It exploded, spraying brown, sticky liquid over the faded floral wallpaper. "You hypocrite," Elias hissed, standing up and pacing the small room. "You paid for the suitcase. You wrote the script." He saw Thorne's poll numbers on the ticker at the bottom of the screen. They were skyrocketing. Thorne was going to win. And once he won, the Medical Relief Act would be dead. Thorne was bankrolled by the very pharmaceutical giants Hale had vowed to fight. Elias stopped pacing. He remembered the voice memo from Hale's iPad. "I look at my granddaughter and I think, what if it were her?" He walked over to his laptop, the one he had carried out of the fire. He opened it and plugged in the flash drive containing the raw data. The source code, the hacked emails, the audio recordings of Hale's private empathy, and the logs of Sterling's payments. He had the truth in his pocket. But truth, Elias knew, was heavy. It was dangerous. If he released this, he wasn't just exposing a lie. He was declaring war on the most powerful people in the country. Sterling wouldn't send a hitman next time. He would send a drone. He would send a SWAT team. He would erase Elias Vance from existence. "Take the money and run," a voice in his head whispered. It sounded like the survival instinct that had kept him alive in the foster care system. "Maya is safe. You have 2 million in crypto. Go to Thailand. Go to Brazil. Disappear. Let Hale fall. He's just one man." Elias sat down at the wobbly desk. He opened a terminal window. He typed a command to wipe the drive.
Formatie full.
His finger hovered over the enter key. On the TV, the interview shifted. They were interviewing a woman in a wheelchair, sitting outside a pharmacy. She was crying. "Senator Hale was our hope," she sobbed into the microphone. "My son has the same condition. Without that bill passing, I don't know what we're going to do. We can't afford the treatment. We were counting on him." Elias stared at the woman. She looked a little like his mother before she died. She looked tired. He looked at his finger on the enter key. He looked back at the screen. The woman wiped her eyes. "He lied to us," she said, her voice breaking. "He looked us in the eye and lied." "No," Elias whispered. "He didn't lie. I did." The realization hit him not as a wave of guilt, but as a clarity of purpose. He hadn't just framed a politician. He had stolen hope. He had reached into the homes of millions of desperate people and extinguished the one light they had left. He had used his gift, his genius, to make the world darker. Maya was safe, but this woman's son wasn't. Elias pulled his hand back from the keyboard. He canceled the format command. "I can't live with this," he said, his voice trembling. "I can't be the architect of this hell." He looked at the digital clock on the bedside table. 2:14 a.m. If he was going to do this, he had to do it now. Sterling would be hunting him. The FBI would be hunting him. He was cornered. And a cornered animal has only one option: attack. He needed a platform. He couldn't just dump the files on WikiLeaks. It would take too long to verify, and by then the news cycle would have cemented Hale's guilt. He needed to hijack the narrative. He needed to do to Thorne what he had done to Hale, but in reverse. He needed to unmask the illusion in real time. He opened the code for the deepfake again. He navigated to the background rendering layer, to the ghost artifact he had hidden in the noise. It was a cryptographic key, a backdoor that allowed the creator to take control of the video stream if it was being played on a network device. It was a long shot. It required the networks to be playing the video live. But they were. It was on every channel. Elias began to type. His fingers flew across the keyboard, shedding the fatigue, shedding the fear. He was back in the flow state. He wasn't Elias the fugitive anymore. He was Ghost_Protocol. He wrote a script that would piggyback on the broadcast signal. It was an injection attack, utilizing the very specific compression algorithm the networks used to broadcast high-definition video. He targeted the major hubs in New York and Atlanta. But he needed more than just a disruption. He needed a confession. He opened the webcam on his laptop. The grainy light of the motel room illuminated his face. The dark circles under his eyes, the stubble, the desperate intensity of a man with nothing left to lose. He hit record. "My name is Elias Vance," he said to the camera, his voice steady. "I am a hacker, and 3 days ago, I was hired by a consortium representing Julian Thorne to create a fake video of Senator Arthur Hale." He held up the flash drive. Everything you saw was computer-generated. The voice, the face, the movement. It was a deepfake created using an algorithm called DeepTruth. "I did it because they threatened my sister's life. But I am not going to let them destroy this country." He stopped the recording. He linked the video file to the injection script. He was ready, but he hesitated. Once he pushed this button, there was no going back. He would be a felon. He would go to prison for a long time. Computer fraud, espionage, maybe even treason depending on how creative the prosecutors got. He would miss Maya's recovery. He would miss her life. But she'll know, he thought. She'll know her brother wasn't a villain. She'll know I tried to fix it. A car door slammed outside. Elias froze. He killed the lights in the room, plunging it into darkness, illuminated only by the blue glow of his screens. He moved to the window and peeled back the curtain a fraction of an inch. A black SUV was idling in the rain across the street. Not a police car. It was too clean, too menacing. 2 men got out. One of them was the man from the hospital cafeteria, Sterling. They knew. How? How did they find him? Elias looked at his setup. The VPN. The Faraday bag. He had been careful. Then his eyes fell on the TV. The cable box. "Idiot," he screamed internally. The cable box is bidirectional. If they have access to the grid, they could trace the signal spikes when I initiated the handshake with the broadcast networks. He had triggered a silent alarm the moment he pinged the NBC servers in New York. Sterling was crossing the street, flanked by another heavy. They moved with purpose. They weren't here to talk. They were here to sanitize the asset. Elias backed away from the window. He had maybe 2 minutes before they kicked down the door. He looked at the laptop. The upload was ready. The script was primed. He could run. He could climb out the bathroom window into the alley. He might lose them in the rain. But if he ran, the laptop stayed here. The truth stayed here. Sterling would destroy it, and Elias would be just another dead junkie in a motel room. A loose end tied off in the dark. "No running," Elias said. He grabbed the heavy dresser he had pushed in front of the door. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it would buy him seconds. He sat back down at the desk. He needed insurance. He needed witnesses. He picked up the motel phone. It was an ancient landline. He dialed 911. "Emergency, which service?" The operator's voice chirped. "FBI," Elias said, his voice calm. "I want to report a federal crime in progress. Location: the Sunset Motel, room 204. I have the creator of the Arthur Hale deepfake. He is armed and dangerous." "Sir, say again? You have who?" "Send the FBI," Elias shouted. "And tell them to bring the media." He slammed the phone down. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. They were coming up. Elias turned to his computer. He initiated the sequence. Executing Truth_protocol. Bat. The progress bar appeared. Injecting payload into national broadcast stream. Targeting CNN, Fox, NBC, ABC. Bypassing encryption. A fist pounded on the door. "Housekeeping," a voice said. It was Sterling. The arrogance of it. "Go away," Elias yelled. "I'm busy saving the world." A gunshot shattered the lock. The wood splintered. The door kicked inward, but the dresser held it back. A hand reached through the gap, trying to shove the furniture aside. Elias didn't look up. He typed furiously, rerouting the signal as the network firewalls tried to block him. He was dancing through the digital minefield, parrying their defenses. The dresser groaned. Sterling was strong. He was pushing it inch by inch. Through the gap, Elias saw the silencer of a pistol. But a bullet whizzed past Elias's ear and shattered the mirror above the sink. "You're making a mistake, Vance," Sterling shouted, his calm veneer cracking. "Stop the upload. We can still make a deal." "No more deals," Elias screamed back. "You wanted a show? I'm giving you the finale." Elias grabbed the flash drive, the physical backup. He shoved it into his pocket. The dresser toppled over with a crash. Sterling stepped into the room, his suit wet with rain, his gun raised. "Step away from the computer," Sterling commanded, leveling the weapon at Elias's head. Elias looked at the screen. He looked at Sterling. He raised his hands, but his right hand hovered over the enter key. "Do it," Elias taunted. "Shoot me, but you can't shoot the signal." Sterling's eyes flicked to the screen. He saw the code. He saw the target. Terror, genuine and raw, flashed across his face. "You son of a bitch," Sterling whispered. He squeezed the trigger. At the exact same moment, Elias smashed his fist down on the enter key. Upload complete. The gun went off. The laptop screen exploded into sparks and plastic shards. Elias was thrown backward by the blast of the bullet hitting the desk, or maybe the computer, he couldn't tell. He hit the floor hard. Pain seared through his shoulder. Not a kill shot, a graze, or shrapnel. Sterling rushed forward, trying to cancel the command, trying to smash the keyboard. But the screen was dead. The machine was dead. But the signal was gone. It was traveling at the speed of light through the fiber optic cables beneath the city. Outside, the wail of sirens grew louder. Not just one car, dozens. The FBI, the police. Elias's 911 call had worked. Sterling heard them too. He looked at Elias, bleeding on the carpet, and then at the window. He made a calculation. He holstered his gun. "This isn't over, Vance," Sterling spat. "You just made yourself the most wanted man in history." Sterling turned and ran, diving out the door and down the hallway, just as the flashing red and blue lights washed over the motel room walls. Elias lay on the floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He looked up at the TV on the wall. The image of Arthur Hale accepting the bribe froze. The audio glitched. Then the screen went black. A green terminal cursor blinked. And then Elias's face appeared on the television. His recording. "My name is Elias Vance," the voice on the TV said. Elias smiled. His vision was blurring, the adrenaline fading into shock. He heard boots thundering up the stairs. FBI, federal agents. Elias closed his eyes. Let them come. Let them arrest him. He had done the one thing he thought was impossible. He had debugged the system. The door to room 204 didn't just open. It disintegrated. The concussive force of the battering ram shattered the frame, sending splinters of cheap pine and laminate flying like shrapnel through the stale air of the motel room. Before the wood even hit the carpet, the room was flooded with the blinding, strobing white light of tactical flashlights mounted on the barrels of assault rifles. The sound was deafening. A cacophony of shouting voices overlapping into a wall of noise that hit Elias Vance with the physical force of a tidal wave. Federal agents. Hands. Show me your hands. Elias couldn't show his hands. He was lying on his side, his right arm pinned beneath him, his shoulder screaming in agony where the bullet or the debris had torn through his hoodie. His ears were ringing, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the shouting. He was disoriented, his vision swimming in a pool of gray static and adrenaline. He felt a boot slam into his back, forcing the air from his lungs, pinning him to the grimy carpet. Suspect down. Room clear. I have one male. Bleeding. Rough hands grabbed his wrists, wrenching them behind his back. The cold bite of steel cuffs ratchet-locked onto his skin, tight enough to bruise. Elias gasped, turning his head to the side, his cheek pressed against the rough fibers of the rug. From this vantage point, he had a direct line of sight to the television mounted on the wall. The screen wasn't black anymore. The agents hadn't noticed it yet. Their focus was on the threat, on the weapon on the floor, on the destroyed laptop that was still smoking on the desk. But Elias saw it. On the screen, the image of Arthur Hale, the fake Arthur Hale, was frozen in a digital seizure. The audio was skipping, a stuttering loop of the word money, money, money. Then the picture fractured. It didn't just cut to static. It tore open from the inside out. "Look," Elias wheezed, spitting blood onto the carpet. "Look at the screen." The agent kneeling on his back, a heavy man in full tactical gear, paused. "Shut up. Look," Elias screamed, finding a reserve of strength in his desperation. Something in his voice, or perhaps the sudden shift in the ambient light of the room as the TV screen shifted colors, made the agent look up. One by one, the other agents in the room lowered their weapons slightly, their eyes drawn to the glowing tube in the corner. The corrupted video of Hale vanished. In its place, a black terminal window appeared, scrolling green text at a speed that was almost hypnotic. It was code, source code, and then, overlaid on the code, a video window opened. It was Elias. It was the recording he had made minutes ago, his face pale and desperate, holding up the flash drive. "My name is Elias Vance," the voice on the TV said, echoing strangely in the small room where the real Elias lay handcuffed on the floor. "I am a hacker, and I am about to show you how a lie is made." The room went silent. The only sound was the voice from the TV and the heavy breathing of the tactical team. On the screen, the video cut away from Elias's face to a split-screen demonstration. On the left was the infamous bribery video. On the right was a wireframe animation, a geometric mesh of thousands of polygons forming the shape of a human face. As the agents watched, the wireframe moved in perfect synchronization with the video. "This is a render," Elias's voiceover explained, calm and clinical. "It is a mathematical model. Notice the lack of pulse in the carotid artery. Notice the perfect symmetry of the blink rate. It is an algorithm called DeepTruth." Then the screen shifted again. The wireframe peeled away, revealing the raw assets used to build the simulation. And then came the audio. It was a phone call. The waveform visualization danced across the screen, jagged and red. "I don't care how you do it," a voice growled from the TV speakers. It was a voice every person in the room recognized. It was the voice of Julian Thorne, the man currently leading the polls by 15 points. "Use the sister," Squeeze the kid until he breaks. I want Hale dead by morning. Politically dead. The agent on Elias's back lessened the pressure. He looked down at Elias, then back at the TV, then at his team leader. The team leader, a woman with FBI, emblazoned in yellow on her vest, lowered her rifle completely. She reached up and touched her earpiece, her face draining of color. "Command," she said into her radio, her voice shaking slightly. "Command, are you seeing this? It's on every channel." 3 miles away, inside the sleek, glass-walled war room of the Julian Thorne campaign headquarters, the celebration was dying a violent death. 5 minutes ago, the room had been a sea of champagne flutes and backslapping. The exit polls were projecting a landslide. The Hale tape had done its job. Thorne was standing near the buffet table, holding a crystal glass, accepting the premature congratulations of his top donors. He felt invincible. He felt like the architect of a new American century. Then the giant monitor wall, a bank of 12 high-definition screens tuned to every major news network, had synchronized. At first, they thought it was a cyber attack on the station, a prank. But when Elias Vance's face appeared, followed by the deconstruction of the deepfake, the room grew so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the untouched drinks. Julian Thorne stood frozen, his smile rigor mortis tight on his face. He watched the wireframe peel away the face of his opponent. He watched the lie disintegrate into geometry. And then he heard his own voice. "Use the sister. Squeeze the kid." The glass slipped from Thorne's hand. It hit the polished floor and shattered, the sound like a gunshot in the silence. No one moved to clean it up. No one moved at all. The staffers, the interns, the wealthy donors, they were all staring at the screen, and then, slowly, instinctively, they began to step away from him. It was a physical recoil, a collective movement to distance themselves from the radioactive isotope that Julian Thorne had just become. Thorne looked around the room, his eyes wild. "It's a fake," he stammered, his voice rising to a screech. "That audio is AI. It's a deep fake. They're doing it to me." But the screen changed again. It showed a bank transfer, a chaotic web of shell companies, peeling away layer by layer until it reached the source, the committee to elect Julian Thorne. And the destination, Zurich Medical Institute. Patient, Maya Vance. The paper trail was absolute. It was undeniable. The campaign manager, a young man who had idolized Thorne, looked at his phone. "Sir," he whispered, looking up with eyes filled with betrayal. "The FBI is on the line. They're at the front desk. They have a warrant." Thorne slumped against the table, knocking over a tray of hors d'oeuvres. He looked at the giant screen, where his own corruption was being broadcast to 300 million people. He had wanted to control the narrative. He had wanted to own the truth. Now the truth was eating him alive. In a nondescript sedan speeding down the I-95 corridor away from D.C., Arthur Hale sat in the back seat, his wife Eleanor clutching his hand so hard her knuckles were white. They were running away. They were fleeing the shame, the humiliation, the end of a life's work. "Turn it up," Arthur said, leaning forward. The driver turned up the volume on the car's radio. The broadcast signal had hijacked the audio waves too. A deliberate manipulation of digital media. The voice of Elias Vance said through the speakers, "Arthur Hale is innocent. The Medical Relief Act was the target. They wanted to kill the bill by killing the man." Arthur Hale closed his eyes. Tears, hot and heavy, squeezed out from beneath his eyelids. He listened to the technical breakdown, the cold logic of the code that cleared his name. He heard the proof of Thorne's treachery. He remembered the name, Vance, the young hacker. He remembered the reports of a brilliant kid from Baltimore who had vanished. "He saved us," Eleanor whispered, bringing Arthur's hand to her lips. "Arthur, listen to me. He saved us." "He destroyed himself to do it," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked out the window at the rain-streaked passing lights. "That boy, he just confessed to a dozen felonies on national television. He's going to prison for the rest of his life." "Turn the car around," Arthur said to the driver. His voice was suddenly strong again, the voice of the senator, the voice of a president in waiting. "Sir?" the driver asked, checking the mirror. "Turn the car around," Arthur commanded. "We're going back to Washington. I have a press conference to give, and I need to call the Attorney General." The interrogation room at the FBI field office in Washington, D.C. was everything Elias expected it to be: cold, sterile, and designed to make you feel small. The table was bolted to the floor. The mirror on the wall was one-way glass. The air conditioning was cranked up too high. Elias sat in a metal chair, his arm in a sling. A medic had patched up the graze on his shoulder. It was just a flesh wound, Sterling's aim ruined by the falling dresser. His ribs were taped. He was exhausted, his body running on fumes, but his mind was strangely clear. He wasn't afraid. Fear belonged to people who had something to lose. Elias had already played his hand. The chips were on the table. The door opened. It wasn't a beat cop or a low-level agent who walked in. It was a woman in a sharp blazer, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She carried a thick file folder. She sat down opposite him, placing the file on the table with a heavy thud. "Assistant Director Miller," she said. "No handshake, no pleasantries." "Elias Vance," Elias replied. "But you know that." "I know a lot of things about you, Mr. Vance," Miller said. She opened the file. "I know you cracked the NASDAQ firewall when you were 19. I know you've been operating as a gray hat for 5 years. And I know you just executed the most sophisticated cyber intrusion in the history of the Federal Communications Commission." "I filed a bug report," Elias said, a faint smile touching his lips. Technically, Miller said, leaning forward. "You hijacked the emergency broadcast system. You violated the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in about 40 different ways. You compromised national security infrastructure. You are looking at 30 years minimum, and that's if the prosecutors are in a good mood." "Did you get him?" Elias asked. He didn't care about the years. Miller paused. She looked at him, studying his face. "Sterling was apprehended at Dulles Airport trying to board a flight to Riyadh. Julian Thorne is currently being arraigned for conspiracy, bribery, and solicitation of cyberterrorism. The video you uploaded. The metadata was pristine. It's an open and shut case." Elias nodded, sinking back into his chair. "Then it was worth it, was it?" Miller asked. "You created the weapon, Elias. You built DeepTruth. You put a gun in their hands. The fact that you jumped in front of the bullet at the last second doesn't change the fact that you built the gun." "I didn't build a gun," Elias said softly. "I built a mirror. I wanted to show people what was possible. I wanted to show them that they can't trust their eyes anymore." "Well, you succeeded," Miller said dryly. "The country is in a panic. The stock market just suspended trading because nobody knows if the CEO interviews on Bloomberg are real or not. You broke reality, kid." "Reality was already broken," Elias countered, his eyes hardening. "I just showed you the cracks. If I hadn't done this, if I hadn't released the source code, Thorne would have won. The bill would have died. People would have died. My sister." He stopped. "Is she safe?" Miller's expression softened. "Just a fraction. We contacted Swiss authorities. The transaction was flagged, but verified as payment for medical services. The surgery is proceeding. She's under protective custody, but she's not a suspect. She's safe." Elias closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. The tension that had been holding his skeleton together finally snapped. He slumped forward, resting his forehead on the cold metal table. 30 years, he mumbled. "Okay, I'll take it." Miller watched him for a long moment. She tapped her pen on the file. "The Department of Justice wants your head on a spike. They want to make an example of you. No one hacks the government and gets away with it." She stood up and walked to the one-way mirror, looking at her own reflection. "But," she continued, "the White House is calling. Senator Hale, who looks very much like the next president, has been on the phone with the Attorney General for the last hour. He's calling you a patriot." Elias lifted his head. "I'm not a patriot. I'm a mercenary with a conscience." That's a rare breed in this town, Miller said. She turned back to him. Here's the situation, Elias. We can't let you walk. You broke too many laws. You have to be punished. Publicly. But we also have a problem. You released the source code for DeepTruth. Now every script kiddie and state-sponsored hacker from Moscow to Beijing has the blueprint to fake reality. We need a defense. We need a countermeasure. She walked back to the table and slid a piece of paper toward him. It wasn't a confession. It was a job offer, but it was printed on Department of Defense letterhead. We need an architect to build the detection system, Miller said. We need someone who knows the algorithm better than anyone else. You can go to federal prison for 30 years, Elias. Or you can come work for us. In a very small room with no windows for a very long time. You'll be a ghost. You won't exist, but you'll be working. Elias looked at the paper. Project Glasshouse. I don't want to work for the government, Elias said. I did this to expose the lies, not to help you build better ones. You won't be building lies, Miller said sternly. You'll be building the filter. You'll be the one verifying what's real. You wanted to fix the cracks in reality? Here's your trowel. Elias looked at the contract. He thought about Maya waking up in Zurich healthy. He thought about Arthur Hale. He thought about the world outside, drowning in a sea of synthetic media. Can I see her? Elias asked. Once a year. Can I see my sister? Miller hesitated, then nodded. Supervised visits. Once the threat level drops. Elias picked up the pen. His hand was shaking, but his signature was firm. 6 months later. The world had moved on, as the world always does, but it had changed. The Hale scandal was now a chapter in history books, a cautionary tale about the fragility of truth in the digital age. Arthur Hale was president-elect, having won the election in a landslide victory fueled by a populace hungry for authenticity. The Medical Relief Act had passed both houses of Congress with bipartisan support. Shame, it turned out, was a powerful motivator for politicians who didn't want to be associated with the corruption of the previous regime. Julian Thorne was awaiting sentencing. The trial had been the first in history to admit cryptographic provenance as primary evidence. Elias Vance sat in a small, comfortable room in a facility that didn't appear on any map. It was located somewhere in the Nevada desert. He had a window now, though it only looked out onto a courtyard of scrub brush and razor wire. He was typing, always typing. On his screen was a live feed from a press conference in Brussels. A world leader was speaking about trade sanctions. A red box appeared around the leader's mouth on Elias's monitor. Anomaly detected. Phoneme mismatch. Audio synthesis probability, 94%. Elias flagged the stream. System alert. Deepfake detected. Source hostile state actor. Initiate protocol 4. He leaned back in his chair. He was the gatekeeper now. He was the filter through which the world saw itself. The door buzzer sounded. A guard stepped in. Vance, you have a visitor. Visiting room B. Elias stood up. It wasn't his scheduled visit with Maya. That wasn't for another month. He walked through the sterile corridors, his badge swiping him through layers of security that made the Virginia server farm look like a toy store. He entered the visiting room. It was divided by thick glass. Sitting on the other side was President-elect Arthur Hale. Hale looked older. The presidency aged men fast, even before they took the oath. But his eyes were clear. He stood up when Elias entered. The Secret Service agents in the corner tensed, but Hale waved them off. Elias sat down. He smoothed his gray jumpsuit. Mr. President. Elias, Hale said. He placed a hand on the glass. I wanted to come sooner. They told me it was complicated. I'm a ghost, sir, Elias said with a wry smile. Ghosts don't get many visitors. I signed the pardon this morning, Hale said quietly. Elias froze. He looked at Hale, searching for the lie, but his internal deepfake detector, the one in his brain, registered nothing but truth. A pardon. Full executive clemency, Hale said. For the hacking. For the broadcast. For everything. You're free, Elias. You can walk out of here today. You can go to Zurich. You can be with Maya. Elias looked at the door. Freedom, sunlight, a life where he wasn't looking at code 20 hours a day. But, Hale continued, I'm asking you not to go. Elias looked back at the president. Why? Because the war isn't over, Hale said. Thorne was just one man. The technology is out there. Pandora's box is open. We need you, Elias. Not as a prisoner, but as a shield. If you leave, there's no one else who can see what you see. Elias looked down at his hands. The hands that had almost destroyed a good man. The hands that had saved him. I can't go back to the way it was, Elias said. I can't just be a civilian. No, Hale agreed. You can't. You're the guardian of the record now. Elias thought about Maya. She was safe. She was happy. She was studying art in Zurich. She sent him letters. She didn't need a brother to pay her bills anymore. She needed a world where she wasn't lied to. I'll stay, Elias said. But on one condition. Name it, the president said. The source code, Elias said. My detection algorithm. The glass house system I'm building. Yes? Make it public, Elias said. Open source. Give it to everyone. The press, the schools, the people. Don't keep the truth locked in a government server. If you want to protect democracy, you have to democratize the truth. Hale smiled. It was the same smile Elias had studied for 1,000 hours in the server room. The smile that he had once tried to destroy. It's a deal, Hale said. Elias stood up. He put his hand against the glass, matching Hale's palm. Then I'll get back to work, Elias said. He turned and walked back toward the heavy steel door. The guard swiped his card. The lock clicked open. Elias Vance stepped back into the shadows of the secure corridor, not as a prisoner, but as a volunteer. The digital ghost was back in the machine, and this time he was keeping the lights on. The tactical light from the assault rifle barrel was the only sun Elias Vance would see for a long time. A blinding white supernova that bleached the dirty motel room of all color and dimension. He didn't feel the knees of the agents pressing into his spine, nor did he feel the cold bite of the handcuffs ratcheting closed around his wrists. His nervous system had overloaded, short-circuiting under the sheer weight of the moment. He was floating in a detached haze, his eyes fixed on the television screen in the corner of the room where the digital face of Arthur Hale was disintegrating into a storm of geometric shards. The audio from the TV was a chaotic loop of his own voice confessing his crimes, warring with the shouts of "clear" and "suspect secured" that bounced off the peeling wallpaper. It was the most beautiful and terrible thing he had ever seen, the destruction of a perfect lie. As the agents hauled him to his feet, dragging him past the shattered remnants of the door and the smoking ruin of his laptop, Elias caught a glimpse of Sterling. The man who had been a shark in a tailored suit was now just a blur of motion vanishing down the fire escape. A rat fleeing a sinking ship, but it didn't matter. The signal was out. The ghost was in the machine, and no amount of running would save the men who had tried to purchase reality. The ride to the FBI field office was a blur of rain-slicked streets and red sirens reflecting off the wet pavement. A kaleidoscopic tunnel that felt like a transition scene in a movie he was no longer directing. They stripped him of his clothes, his phone, and his dignity, replacing them with an orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's despair. He was placed in a holding cell that was nothing more than a concrete cube with a stainless steel toilet and a bench bolted to the wall. A physical void designed to break the mind before the questioning even began. But Elias didn't break. He sat on the bench, his shoulder throbbing where the bullet had grazed him, and closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he wasn't in a cell. He was in a hospital room in Zurich, imagining the steady, strong beat of a heart monitor that no longer sounded like a countdown to death. He held on to that image, Maya, breathing, living, like a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood. It was the only currency he had left, and he had spent everything to buy it. Time lost its meaning in the windowless bowels of the federal building. It could have been hours or days before the heavy steel door clanked open and Assistant Director Miller walked in. She was a woman carved from granite, her face a mask of professional neutrality that slipped only slightly when she looked at the young, exhausted man shackled to the table. She didn't shout. She didn't slam files on the table. She simply sat down, placed a tablet between them, and pressed play. It was the news. Not just one channel, but a mosaic of global coverage. The world was on fire. The stock of PharmaCorp had crashed 40% in pre-market trading. Protests had erupted outside Julian Thorne's campaign headquarters. A sea of people holding signs that read, "We know the truth," and Vance told us. The Justice Department had already issued warrants for Thorne and his entire inner circle. The narrative had flipped so violently that the sheer G-force of it had snapped the neck of the conspiracy. Miller paused the video and looked at Elias, her eyes searching for a flicker of arrogance, but finding only a profound, weary sadness. She told him that he had committed treason, espionage, and computer fraud on a scale that made historical hackers look like tourists. She told him the prosecutors wanted to bury him under the prison. And then, she slid a folder across the table. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a confirmation of a wire transfer and a medical update from the Zurich University Hospital. Maya Vance was out of surgery. The transplant was successful. She was awake. Elias put his hand over his mouth to stifle the sob that tried to claw its way out of his throat. He wept, not for his lost freedom, but for the sheer, overwhelming relief that washed over him. He had won. The rest, the prison, the trial, the public shaming, was just the bill coming due, and he was ready to pay it. The interrogation that followed was less of a questioning and more of a technical debriefing. They didn't need him to confess. He had already done that to 300 million people. They needed to know how. They needed to understand the weapon he had built so they could figure out if anyone else was holding one. Elias talked for 12 hours straight. He explained the DeepTruth algorithm, the subsurface shading, the audio synthesis, the way he had exploited the broadcast injection protocols. He gave them everything. He held nothing back, not because he wanted a deal, but because he realized with terrifying clarity that he had opened Pandora's box. He had shown the world that seeing was no longer believing, and if he didn't help them build a lid for the box, the concept of objective truth would cease to exist. The trial was a spectacle, a circus of flashbulbs and screaming pundits that Elias watched from the detached distance of the defendant's table. He pleaded guilty to all charges. His public defender, a nervous man who clearly thought Elias was insane, had urged him to fight, to claim duress, to use Maya's illness as a shield. But Elias refused. To deny the crime would be to deny the impact of the truth. He stood before the judge, a slight figure in an oversized jumpsuit, and spoke only once. He said that he had built a lie to save a life and destroyed the lie to save the country, and he accepted the consequences of both. The gavel came down like a hammer strike on a coffin nail. 30 years. Federal maximum security. No possibility of parole for the first 15. The courtroom erupted, a mixture of cheers and boos, but Elias didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Arthur Hale, who was sitting in the back row, flanked by Secret Service agents. The senator, now the presumptive president-elect, met his gaze and gave a slow, solemn nod. It was a silent acknowledgement of a debt that could never be repaid, a promise that while Elias was going into the dark, the light he had lit would be protected. Prison was not the hell Elias had feared. It was a monastery of concrete and routine. The days were measured in headcounts and meal trays, the weeks in phone calls to his lawyer, the months in the changing angle of the sun through the sliver of window in his cell. He was placed in protective custody, isolated from the general population who might view the Hale hacker as a target or a hero, both of which were dangerous. Solitude became his companion. He spent the first year reading every book in the library, devouring philosophy and history, trying to understand the human components of the code he had manipulated. He thought about the nature of reality, about how fragile the consensus of truth really was. He had broken it with a few keystrokes, and now, sitting in the silence, he wondered if it could ever truly be fixed. The letters from Maya were his lifeline. They arrived once a week, written on thick, creamy paper that smelled faintly of the Alps. She wrote about the sharpness of the air in Switzerland, about the taste of the hot chocolate, about the way her chest didn't hurt when she laughed anymore. She sent him sketches she made of the mountains, charcoal drawings that captured the permanence of the rock. She never wrote about his crime. She never asked why. She just wrote about her life, the life he had bought with his freedom. In her letters, he saw the world he was missing, but he didn't feel jealousy. He felt a profound sense of purpose. Every breath she took was a line of code he had written perfectly. It was the only compile that mattered. 3 years into his sentence, the routine was broken. He was pulled from his cell not by a guard, but by a pair of men in dark suits who escorted him to a private room in the administrative wing. Waiting for him was not a warden, but Arthur Hale. The president looked older, his hair completely gray now, the lines around his eyes etched deeper by the weight of the office. He dismissed the guards and sat opposite Elias. No glass partition between them this time. He placed a small metal box on the table. Inside was a hard drive. Hale spoke of a world that was struggling to breathe. The DeepTruth incident had inoculated the public, but the virus had mutated. Foreign adversaries were using AI to generate fake riots, fake scandals, fake declarations of war. Reality was under siege, and the government's defenses were crumbling. Hale offered Elias a choice. He placed a pardon on the table, a piece of paper with the gold seal of the President of the United States. It offered immediate release, a clean record, a chance to walk out the front gate and fly to Zurich. Elias looked at the paper, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could smell the rain outside. He could almost feel the hug Maya would give him. It was everything he wanted. But then Hale placed a second document on the table. It was a classified directive for a new initiative, Project Glasshouse. It wasn't a job offer. It was a conscription. The president explained that they needed an architect to build a global authentication system, a digital watermark for reality that could verify the source of any video, audio, or image in real time. They needed someone who knew the shadows better than the light. They needed the ghost. Elias looked at the pardon, then at the directive. He thought about the freedom of the body versus the freedom of the mind. If he took the pardon, he would be free, but he would be irrelevant. He would watch from the sidelines as the digital world, the world he loved, was consumed by the very fire he had helped kindle. He realized that his penance wasn't sitting in a cell. His penance was fixing the machine. He pushed the pardon back across the table. He told the president he didn't want to leave. He wanted a terminal. He wanted a server. He wanted access. He asked for one condition: that the system he built would be open source, transparent to every citizen, owned by no government and no corporation. He wanted to give the people the lens to see the truth for themselves. Hale smiled, a sad, knowing smile, and shook his hand. Elias was moved that night, not to freedom, but to a facility buried deep beneath the Nevada desert, a place that didn't exist on any map. It was a high-tech prison of his own making, a glass house where he could see everything. He sat before a wall of monitors that streamed the pulse of the world's data. He wrote code. He built firewalls for the truth. He hunted the fakes, the lies, the digital phantoms trying to sow discord, and he dismantled them with surgical precision. He was a ghost in the machine again, but this time he was the guardian. Years bled into decades. The world outside changed. Presidents came and went. Technology leaped forward. Elias Vance became a myth, a bedtime story told to young coders, a legend of the dark web. He grew old in the glow of the screens. His hair turned silver, his eyes dimming, but his mind remained sharp, a diamond cutting through the noise. He watched Maya grow up through the digital window. He watched her graduate, fall in love, get married. He watched her have children of her own. He watched her life unfold in high definition, a movie he had produced but could never star in. He never saw her in person again. It was the price he paid, a self-imposed quarantine to ensure that he could never be used as leverage again. The end came quietly on a Tuesday evening. Elias was sitting at his console, reviewing the code for a new quantum encryption protocol. The facility was silent, save for the hum of the cooling fans, a sound that had haunted him since that night in Virginia. He felt a tightness in his chest, a sudden flutter like a bird trapped in a cage. He didn't reach for the alarm. He didn't call the medics. He simply leaned back in his ergonomic chair and looked at the center screen. On it was a live feed of a park in Zurich. It was spring. The cherry blossoms were falling like pink snow. In the frame, an elderly woman sat on a bench, watching two young children chase a dog. It was Maya. She looked happy. She looked at peace. She looked real. Elias smiled. His fingers rested on the keyboard, not typing, just resting. He thought about the line between the ones and the zeros, the infinite space where the truth lived. He had spent his life navigating that space, lost in the gray, but he had finally found his way home. The code was compiled. The program was stable. There were no more bugs to fix. "Hello, world," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp in the quiet room. He closed his eyes. The hum of the servers faded into the sound of wind rushing through the trees, the sound of rain on a motel roof, the sound of a sister's laughter. The cursor on the screen blinked once, twice, 3 times, waiting for a command that would never come. And then the screen went to sleep. The digital ghost was finally offline.